Our top story. On Tuesday, the European Parliament approved sweeping reforms to make EU climate change policies more ambitious. The reforms are aimed at massively cutting the bloc's greenhouse emissions, including the introduction of a carbon border tax on imports.
Dear colleagues, we have now agreed on the cornerstone of the Fit for 55. Like Esther de Lange said, the Holy Trinity, ETS, CBAM and the Social Climate Fund. This is good for the climate, it's good for people and it's good for our jobs in industry.
Under the incoming legislation, European Union carbon emissions would be reduced by 62% by 2030 compared to the levels in 2005. This is a big step up from a previous target of a 43% cut. The legislative step crystallizes an ambitious EU plan to reform Europe's carbon market by broadening an emissions trading scheme to more industries and lowering quotas of allowable polluting gases. Europe's carbon market forces power plants and factories to buy carbon dioxide permits when they pollute. It has slashed those sectors' emissions by 43% since 2005. Under the upgrade, factories will lose the free CO2 permits they currently receive by 2034, and shipping emissions will be added to the carbon dioxide market from 2024. Lawmakers also backed the EU's world-first plan to phase in a levy on imports of high-carbon goods from 2026. This is aimed at imports of steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity and hydrogen. The carbon border levy will prevent the bloc's industries from being undercut by more polluting foreign competitors, removing the temptation for EU firms to relocate to regions with lax environmental rules.
We can say Europe leads the green revolution, and we will be the world's first climate-neutral continent. And the deals on the reform of the emissions trading system, the carbon border adjustment mechanism and the social climate fund are all central and complementary in keeping the European Green Deal on track. These laws will put a price on the carbon we produce, and it means that the most polluting industries will have to increase their emission reduction targets. It will also put a price for non-EU producers, providing a level playing field so that we will not leave our industry at a disadvantage vis-à-vis their external competitors. They will also need to pay for their emissions if their products are to be sold in Europe. And with the help of the Social Climate Fund, amounting to an estimated total of €86.7 billion, this will ensure that the climate transition leaves no one behind. We have to make this transition together.
The laws still need final approval from the member EU countries. The reform comes at a time when the 27 EU countries are collectively the third biggest global emitter of carbon dioxide. But the biggest by far is China, which is greatly expanding its fleet of coal-fired power plants, despite a vow to have carbon emissions peak by 2030, then reduce to net zero by 2060. Then comes the United States, historically the biggest carbon gas emitter, which has a long-term strategy of reaching net zero by 2050. US President Joe Biden has brought in a $370 billion Inflation Reduction Act, providing hefty subsidies for US industry to drive the push for a greener America. Keeping all of this in mind, Brussels is preparing separate EU legislation to boost European industrial competitiveness in the face of the US subsidies and colossal Chinese investment in the renewable energy sector. Joining us for more on this is Lauri Miliverta, lead analyst at the Center for Research and Energy and Clean Air, an independent research organization headquartered in Finland. He is joining us from Bangkok. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Sir, the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen has described this legislation as a milestone. Under this, European Union carbon emissions would be reduced by 62% by 2030. It's an ambitious target. The question is it achievable?
The current energy crises, high energy prices, and the war in Ukraine have really driven home the cost of Europe relying on fossil fuels, and that's what's added this extra momentum. Of course, together with the threat of climate change. The sales of electric cars, of heat pumps, of solar panels, and so on have skyrocketed in Europe. So the market has already been responding, and under this kind of momentum, these targets are definitely achievable if and when this legislation is passed.
Sir, some would say that European Union has been a leader in shifting to more environmentally responsible energy policies. We in fact just heard Roberto Metsola saying that Europe will lead the green revolution. But the war in Ukraine has had the impact on the energy costs. How much has that war made the target of net zero by 2050 challenging for the European Union?
The main impact has really been the price of fossil fuels, of oil, gas, and coal going up. And that has made clean energy more competitive, more economically attractive, and also has made it a cornerstone of economic policy. That's what we also need to combat inflation and so on. So the long-term impact has very clearly been to make these targets easier and more attainable.
Sir, you have argued that emissions from power plants, industry and agriculture are responsible for 90,000 deaths from air pollution in the EU and UK per year. I was going through your Twitter handle, and these are quite startling statistics. Tell us how you arrived at that.
We looked at the latest reported air pollutant emissions from heavy industry, from power plants, and from agriculture in Europe. And we found that all of these industries were still far away from using best technology to control their air pollutant emissions. And so because of this, we're seeing this 90,000 deaths. And of course, the reduction in fossil fuels and the shift to cleaner production processes in industry that this new climate legislation targets will also help significantly reduce deaths from air pollution.
Sir, let me ask you this. The biggest emitter by far is China, which is greatly expanding its fleet of coal-fired power plants despite a vow to have carbon emissions peak by 2030, then reduce to net zero by 2060. US, the other big emitter, aims to reach net zero by 2050. So for us to witness any meaningful impact, China and US and all the member EU countries have to stick to their pledges. This despite the global and other geopolitical challenging. That's quite a daunting task, isn't it?
What's fascinating is that, especially with this current energy crisis, it's become clear that economic success and market leadership means also leadership in clean energy technologies. So there's a race where the US is starting to get serious about developing its own clean energy industries. China has had that strategy for a long time, and now Europe is stepping up. So I think the fact that Europe is starting to do more is only going to spur China forward. The other element in Europe's new legislation is that industrial producers in China and elsewhere who want to export to the European Union will face a carbon price, and that means that there's a new incentive also for Chinese industries, for Indian industries, and so on to reduce their emissions and be cleaner to gain an advantage in the EU, which is the world's largest economy.
Sir, under this new legislation, there would be a carbon border tax on imports, which is technically being called an adjustment. tell us how will that work? And also I want to add there, you have argued on the need to accelerate clean energy investment, not just reduce the greenhouse gases, but accelerate clean energy investment. What's the roadmap to that?
The idea with the carbon border tax is that that industries and businesses outside of Europe that export to Europe face the same carbon price as industries inside Europe. And this is happening at the same time as industries in Europe are going to face a higher carbon price and are going to actually pay for all of their CO2 allowances instead of getting them for free. So in this sense, both things are being stepped up, both for exporters into the EU and for domestic industries. And so this is hopefully creating an incentive for everyone to switch to clean energy supply, to switch to cleaner production processes in industries like steel and so on. Europe has managed to reduce emissions, has been a leader for some time in investing in clean energy, but has in fact fallen behind China in particular in recent years. So there's a lot of work to do to scale up solar power, wind power, other key clean energy technologies, and the energy crisis has really driven that home for everyone.
All right, Lori Miliverta, lead analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Thanks very much for joining us with your perspective.
Thank you so much.